There's a few of them, but something has caught my eye. It's JoJo the Heaven Plan. Truth be told, we touched on this a little bit while I was reacting to part 6, and I was a little bit WTFing.jpg with the whole notion that Dio was doing everything for some sort of philanthropy project. Because clearly the impression that I got from Dio in parts 1, 2, and 3 was that he was doing it out of self-interest, not because he gave a crap about humanity. And then apparently there was some retconning about his plan and this, and that. So, truth be told, I kind of didn't know what the whole point of the whole getting to heaven even was, to be honest. I never fully understood the dimensions of that and what it had to do with humanity as a whole. I personally just saw these... Well, I saw the priest as sort of having a twisted ideology based on this or that, and didn't really pay it too much mind, because if you think about anything in JoJo too much, your brain will begin to hurt. So I didn't think about it too much. So I want to watch this video on the Heaven Plan. Hopefully it explains what it is in some detail so someone like me can actually understand it. Looking at the thumbnail really quickly, I believe it will do just that, because the thumbnail is like... looks like a pretty serious thumbnail. Alright, cool. Let's watch it. Let's see it. Let's discuss it. Let's have some fun. Oh yeah, this opening. I think we watched some of his videos in like the first stream.
Someday, I'm on the beat!
Wait, was this one of the musics in the like character selection screen of an old Dragon Ball Z game? It has that type of feel to it, doesn't it?
In Part 6 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Pucci's goal was to carry out the last will of his master, Dio. This was to bring the world to a state of what Dio called heaven.
The true winner is the one that gets to see heaven. I will get there no matter how many things I must sacrifice. I understand that happiness cannot be attained by having an invincible body or mountains of money, or even being the rule of the human race. True happiness lies there, if one is able to go to heaven. Sorry, I should have read from right to left, but I didn't, because stupid Kuma.
The complicated nature of this plan leaves some people confused, and some often write it off as totally nonsensical. In this video, I will be going over what heaven is, and the process of attaining it, both as it was planned, and as it occurred in the story. In one of my previous videos, I went in depth on the concept of fate, which has existed as an observable force in the world of JoJo ever since the very first part.
Did I actually watch that video? I don't remember 100%, might have been 2 weeks ago.
Understanding the concept of fate is absolutely integral to understanding the Heaven Plan, along with the motivations of Pucci and Dio. I will retread some of that information in this video, but I still recommend watching my Fate video, since there I also delve into its presence in other parts. Before we can understand heaven, we must first understand the one who came up with it, Dio. Dio Brando was born into poverty, and suffered through an abusive lifestyle. This molded him into a manipulator, who planned to infiltrate the Joestar family and steal their wealth. His ambition was so great that he rejected his own humanity, and shifted his goal to that of world domination. He was eventually defeated by Jonathan Joestar, and sealed away for 100 years. During his time in the coffin, Dio had plenty of time to think over his mistakes. It is at this point that I believe he reached an understanding of fate.
Okay, since I haven't seen the Fate video, I am hoping that whoever has been linking these videos has also linked the Fate video. Well, would you look at that? It's the video just before the Heaven Plan. So let's watch the Fate video and then jump back really quickly to the Heaven Plan video. Just so I'm not watching it without context, missing something, and then asking questions which are probably already answered in this one. So we'll do both. Yay, let's learn something on a Friday night.
Across all of the supernatural forces in JoJo, by far the most omnipresent of them is fate. The presence of fate can be seen in every part from the original universe of JoJo. It informs everything that the characters do. and many characters are completely based on their relationship with fate. Fate as a plot device is present in a wide variety of media, all the way back to the ancient Greeks. However, in contemporary fiction, it is often viewed as a sort of cop-out when a story has nowhere to go, or is used as a cliché in Chosen One type stories. JoJo is not excluded from this kind of criticism, but I feel like it is unwarranted when you examine the ways that fate in JoJo differentiates itself. In this video, I will be going over how fate works in JoJo, and how it aligns itself with Araki's design philosophy. The most important thing to understand about fate in JoJo is that it is much more defined with its implementation than in other stories. In the world of JoJo, fate is a concrete, observable force in the world. Part 6 gives us the clearest definition of fate as described by Dio. His description of fate as gravity, and the gravity manipulation that is integral to his heaven plan, is not a coincidence. Instead of being an abstract idea as it is in other media, fate in JoJo is quite literally a gravitational pull, moving you along a predestined path. You could even say the existing law of gravity itself is fate. Every person has their own gravity.
Doesn't the universe have some sort of frequency, and if you deviate from it, it pulls back to that baseline?
And any meeting of two people is determined by the pull between them. This idea of an abstract, supernatural concept being turned scientific is extremely common among Araki's work. The concept of a gravity between people has been explored since long before Part 6. Part 4 was the introduction of the stand arrow, and the idea of stand users being drawn to each other. The arrow is known to seek out those with potential, enough that Kira's father was able to use it like a dowsing rod, letting it point to where it wanted to go. It may have been this seeking of potential that caused the meteor to gravitate towards Earth in the first place. The gravity of the human spirit drew it in. Dio's character and his philosophy is an important topic when it comes to this discussion. In Part 1, his initial goal was to take control of the Joestar family. After rejecting his humanity, his ambition was extended to the country and later the entire world. This is not a complex goal, but even as early as Part 1, we can see some of the seeds of his later motivation. He had a very traumatic childhood, and that, along with his conflict with Jonathan, would influence the philosophy he developed later. After his defeat, Dio spent 100 years at the bottom of the ocean. He was conscious during this time, and probably had quite a lot to think about. While it may not be necessary for explaining what comes later, I do believe that Dio reached some form of enlightenment during his time spent here. After emerging, Dio befriended the fortune teller Enya, and it is at this point that he reached an understanding of fate. Dio's true goal is to achieve his idea of heaven. Heaven is a state of mind in which you are completely aware of your destiny and come to accept it. As someone with a turbulent childhood, and who is endlessly fated to have conflict with the Joestars, this would be the ideal state of being for someone like Dio. In order for heaven to be attained, time must be accelerated to the Singularity Point, and the universe is recreated. All living beings are lifted out of the universe and placed back in, with the memories of their previous experiences. Because of this, they are aware of everything that will ever happen to them. Made in Heaven is the only stand capable of doing this, and understanding the way that it is created is essential to understanding fate. Dio's soul was reborn through the green baby, which is essentially his will to attain heaven given form as a living being. This fused with Pucci and began changing his stand into Sea Moon, which is able to manipulate gravity. It is said to us that gravity and time are one and the same. So when Sea Moon uses its powers at certain coordinates, and with certain gravitational influences, it can manipulate time itself. Not only are gravity and time one and the same, but fate is included in that as well. By creating this new universe, Pucci gains control over fate to create heaven. Dio's idea of heaven is an inherently complacent one, since it is not just knowing your own future, but completely coming to terms with it. This mindset is perfectly in line with what Dio called peace of mind in Part 3. If you completely accept fate, good or bad, you'll be at peace. Pucci's ideology is similar to Dio's. The traumatic events he experienced as a young man were so severe that he became obsessed with the sequence of events. When he examined it, he could not determine whose fault it really was. Was it solely the actions of the people Pucci hired? He was the one that hired them after all, and he is the one that omitted the information that could have avoided the situation entirely. Was it Pucci's fault for acting so harshly after hearing the confession?
Is this whole thing about joining Dio Pucci's way of just dealing with his own guilt and trying to put accountability on an outside force so he can stop feeling guilty for his sins? Maybe.
Or is the mother the one at fault for stealing Wes in the first place?
That's such a stretch. Am I at fault for being drunk and speeding in a car and crashing into another car? Or is the driver's mother at fault for giving birth to the driver? Had the driver never been born, I would have never crashed into that car.
But even then, her actions were influenced by her own child's death, and what could have predated that? Could this all have been predetermined by some event that happened long before anyone was aware? His fixation on how Perla's death happened made Dio's words ring true to him. All of these events and chance meetings that have happened were due to the unseen influence of gravity. He would eventually seek out Dio and begin to understand fate, fully committing himself to creating heaven. In a world where all people can know and accept their destiny, the internal trauma from what happened to Perla can be averted. Kira is similar to Dio in many ways. Just like Dio, he had a troublesome childhood, which eventually led to him committing great atrocities. Their main similarity, however, is their outlook on life. Kira's goal is to have a quiet life, very much in line with Dio's idea of peace of mind. At times, Kira seems to be blessed by fate, and he is surrounded by an inhuman amount of good luck.
I want to have a quiet life. Your stand is literally blowing people up.
He was given the perfect stand for destroying evidence, and has succeeded in staying completely free of suspicion. His own gravity was even strong enough to draw the arrow to him a second time, giving him a nearly foolproof method of avoiding detection. However, even with all of this, he was still overcome, and his luck ironically disappeared. Kira's flaw was that although he only wanted to have a quiet life, he led a lifestyle that was inherently chaotic. He wished to have a quiet life in spite of this, rather than accepting his own circumstances. This contradiction eventually caused his luck and, by extension, fate to abandon him. Others, however, are not so keen to sit by and let fate happen. The character of Diavolo is very heavily based on overcoming fate, and this becomes one of the main themes of Part 5. Diavolo's personality is steeped in paranoia and a desire to completely erase any traces of his past. His stand, King Crimson, is able to see a forecast of the future, and through his time skips, remove himself from what is fated to happen. Anything in the prediction is absolute, so even if he removes himself, the results of his original actions will still move along as if he were there, pushed along by a form of gravity. Diavolo is constantly trying to best fate, at the expense of countless people around him. However, Diavolo is not really escaping fate like he wishes. As we know from Part 6, fate can be changed, but the changing of fate is still predestined. Even the nature of Diavolo's ability reveals this to us. In order to know what to do next, he is obsessively viewing a premonition of what will happen. While he thinks he is escaping fate, he is still ultimately a slave to it. Fate seems to operate on a principle of what goes up must come down. While you can change fate, it will eventually self-correct in the other direction. Diavolo's changing of fate is what made Giorno fated to attain Requiem. His own meddling in fate is what causes him to have the harshest punishment out of any of the characters. Dio and Diavolo are the two polar opposites for how to deal with fate. Beyond the obvious naming convention between them, their ideologies are fundamentally opposed. One is obsessed with changing their fate, while the other completely accepts it. Both of these, however, are counter to the ideology of our protagonists. While the antagonist's point of view is often fatalist, the protagonists do not concern themselves with what is predestined, but instead doing what they think is right. This is really one of the most important lessons about fate in the series, that it doesn't matter if fate is altered. One way or another, it will end up favoring the just path. This idea of a right path that the characters are following can even be seen in the most recent chapters of Part 8. In an afterword written for Part 5, Araki describes the protagonist's relationship with fate. He says that one of the main themes of Part 5 is the question of how to deal with fate. Just like Dio, Giorno and the other Part 5 characters were born into a sad life where things happen to them beyond their control. How do you deal with something that controls all of existence? The answer the protagonists have is not to try and change fate. They know that their own sense of justice is the only thing they need to be happy. This was supported in Part 6, with the final fate-related revelation. After Pucci had spent so long justifying his horrible actions with the end goal of heaven, he is defeated by Emporio, who understands that fate only follows the path of justice. The fate that exists within JoJo is the perfect system to represent the story Araki wanted to tell. The mechanics of fate in JoJo are also far more fleshed out than I've seen in any other series. Despite this, its depth seems to be too often ignored by fans, and the system is at times dismissed by people altogether. I hope that this video helped you reach a greater understanding of fate, and that in turn, you have a better understanding of the themes it represents in JoJo. This was a fun video to do, so if you have a video idea for a similar topic, comment it down below. If you want to be updated on new videos or leave suggestions, join the Hum and Beat Discord using the link in the description. You can also support the channel on Patreon to receive Discord perks and other rewards, such as uncut music reference videos.
See, even he has to upload uncut videos on Patreon because, of course, YouTube is going to force you to cut them. You know, the thing that's really funny about this is that in Part 1, I was really seriously paying attention and analyzing what was going on. And in Part 2 and 3, I learned to really let go of that because overthinking and trying to connect the dots would just make your head implode. Now, I'm being incentivized to start connecting the dots and thinking about it. But even considering to do that makes my head hurt because I remember the amount of suffering that I went through in Part 1. My brain's saying, no, don't do it. You cannot take JoJo too seriously. I could take it on like a, let's call it surface level of, okay, fate is this. It's just a predestined sequence of events. The outcome has already been decided. You can try and pull and deviate from it, but a bit like an elastic band, it will always pull you back and snap you back. If I try to analyze it more than that, I'm just going to get a headache, given how the characters in the story operates as a whole. So, like, I'm just going to jump into the Heaven Plan video and try to see how much of Dio they actually retconned. Because honestly, Dio in Part 3 didn't seem that deep. He did it because he wanted his freedom and just to do whatever he wanted, whether it be world domination or just being top dog. It didn't seem really deep. Okay, sure. He wanted peace of mind. Fine. But that's still just his own self-interest. It has nothing to do with humanity. Alright, back to the Heaven Plan video. Alright, we're up to here.
It is at this point that I believe he reached an understanding of fate, and formed his heaven philosophy that would govern his actions from there onward. Dio's idea of heaven is a state of being in which you are completely aware of your own fate and have no power to change it. You know everything that will happen to you for your entire life. Dio seems to be a person who is cursed by fate. From the start, he was fated to be born into a tragic life, in which his mother dies and his father abuses him. Because of this, the ideal state for someone with a tumultuous life like Dio is a world in which he is completely aware of his own fate and then comes to accept it. Once you have accepted this fate, you have reached the peace of mind that Dio calls heaven. Unlike most stories in which fate is an abstract concept, the fate in JoJo is an observable, physical truth. The force known as fate is actually the force of gravity itself. All mass has a gravitational pull, and these various pulls is what influences and carries out the fated path. All people and objects are governed by it, and while some may believe they are altering fate, in reality the changing of fate itself is fated. Fate is completely inescapable. Anyone who tries to overcome it will eventually be shot down by it. The only way to thrive within the system of fate is to completely accept it. It would become Dio's goal for the entire world to face this truth, whether they wish to or not.
I never got that vibe in part 3. I just thought he just didn't give a crap. He doesn't really care about the people in the world.
Now that we hopefully understand the concepts of heaven and fate, how exactly will Dio reach this goal? This is where the heaven plan comes in. In order for heaven to be attained, the universe must be accelerated to the Singularity Point. By doing this, the universe will be reborn. People will have already witnessed their entire existence, and will now be placed back into it with foreknowledge of it. Once they know their own unchangeable fate, they can start to internally come to terms with it. With Dio's current stand, the world, this goal is not possible. The world has control over time, and Dio likely understood another truth, which is that the law of gravity and the flow of time are intertwined. And as we already know, gravity and fate are intertwined as well. As a time-manipulating stand, the world is the first step to creating the stand necessary for heaven. However, Dio already had his stand, and that couldn't be changed. So he devised a ritual, in which he could force this stand to become the one of his choosing. Dio's plan to attain heaven is as follows. He begins by inscribing the 14 phrases into his stand. A stand is synonymous with one's soul, and by inscribing these phrases, he is ingraining them into his soul itself. This will act as a kind of password for later. Then, he would destroy his own stand. Dio's will would be revived through his remaining bone, and by sacrificing the souls of 36 sinners, create a homunculus known as the Green Baby. By inscribing his soul with the 14 phrases, he not only implants those phrases into the Green Baby, but also implants it with his wish for it to be capable of reaching heaven. The baby is essentially Dio's will to attain heaven given form. Through the exchange of the power of 36 souls, Dio's inscribed soul is reborn in the way he chooses. The baby would be sought out by someone that Dio trusts, and this person would relay the 14 phrases to them, confirming their identity. The baby would then fuse with this person, implanting Dio's will to attain heaven into the person's stand. This would cause the stand to become Sea-Moon, the one needed for the plan. With this gravity manipulation stand, the person would need to head to specific coordinates on Earth.
Is it just me, or is this like one of those Game Boy Advanced really specific glitches where you can summon Mew in Pokemon Red and Blue if you fulfill a certain number of steps? Which is just like, who the hell found that? But, I mean, at this point, Dio's consciousness is already gone. In order to do that, Dio is dead. His stand is destroyed, Dio's consciousness is destroyed. Even if Dio is recreated, it's still not Dio. It's his wish, sure, but it's not his consciousness, so he's still dead. But like, okay, let's continue.
Coordinates point to Cape Canaveral, where the gravitational pull of the Earth is at its weakest. The other major gravitational factor accounted for is the phase of the moon. According to the plan, it must be a new moon.
That's in Pokemon Yellow? Is it? I don't remember. I remember I did it once. Like, I ended up buying a used Pokemon game, playing it to that point, not fighting that specific trainer in the second town, going through it, getting that Mew, and I was like, that's done. Because in the original game, I ended up getting 150 Pokemon. I never got Mew. And then I played another time, I ended up getting Mew, but I didn't have, I think it was like a... I didn't have like a Charmeleon or a Charizard or something like that. Like I was missing one Pokemon. So I did that just to cross it off the list. But I don't know if it was yellow. I don't think I ever actually played Pokemon Yellow. I think it could have been red and blue, but it could have been yellow, but I'm not 100% sure. I thought that glitch was fixed in yellow. Or did they get rid of the missing no glitch in yellow?
Once reaching these coordinates, Seamoon will be able to manipulate gravity in such a way that time itself will be affected, since, once again, time and gravity are intertwined. Once this happens, the stand will evolve into Made in Heaven. This stand can accelerate time until the universe reaches the Singularity Point. When this happens, a new universe is created. All living creatures experience a full cycle of the universe and are then placed back into an identical universe. Now that they know their own fate and that it is futile to try and alter it, they can begin to come to terms with it. Once someone has understood that their fate is absolute and accepts it, they will attain the peace of mind Dio spoke about.
So since it kind of did go to the Singularity and created a new universe, when we were watching Part 6, it went all the way to that point in Part 6. But does that mean that in that new universe, Dio had memories from the previous universe? Or does that not count because he was dead at the time Heaven's whatever was created and accelerated time? Like, that's the real thing. How does this whole plan benefit Dio in any way? Because he's dead.
And reach the state of enlightenment known as Heaven. As we know, gravity and fate are one and the same. Because of this, Made in Heaven has true control over fate in this new universe. The universe could be played from the beginning, allowing a full cycle to take place within this Heaven effect. I believe this is what Dio's ultimate goal was, for all living beings to live within this idea of heaven. However, in practice, Dio's plan did not go completely as intended. Now that we've gone over the intended plan, we'll look at how these events actually played out in the story, since it deviates from the plan in a few key ways. After being freed from the coffin, Dio would meet with the fortune teller Enya, who would teach him about stands. She would also supplement whatever he already understood about fate. Enya had come into possession of 5 stand arrows, and Dio would use these to give himself and many others the ability to use a stand. Dio's own stand proved incapable of carrying out the Heaven plan on its own, so Dio would travel the world seeking out other stand users. He would eventually be drawn to Pucci, and with his white snake, the plan would be expedited. After repeated visits with him, Dio began to trust Pucci enough to designate him as the person needed for this plan. He gave Pucci one of his bones, in order to revive his soul after the destruction of his stand. He then sent Pucci to Florida to infiltrate the staff of the Green Dolphin Street prison. Once he had gotten considerable influence in the prison, he would be able to arrange for the needed sacrifice. However, this would take some time. Meanwhile, Dio would search for more stand users. He would still need a stand that could revive his body, and I think it's possible that the Nijimura father's stand was a candidate for this, due to its possible regenerative properties. He was also sought out for his proximity to Jotaro Kujo. Keicho Nijimura suspected that Dio was searching for a certain type of stand, although Keicho was unaware of what exactly this stand was. Next, Dio would inscribe the 14 phrases onto his stand, and prepare for his stand's eventual destruction. Dio would then write his plan into his diary, planning to relay this all to Pucci in the near future. However, the events of Part 3 would eventually occur, causing Jotaro Kujo to pursue Dio. With his understanding of fate, Dio knows that he is destined to clash with the Joestars, and decides that they need to be dealt with in order for them not to interfere with the remaining preparations for the plan. Of course, Dio would be defeated by Jotaro and his body destroyed. While Dio's death is a necessary step in the plan, it had come at an unintended time. To further complicate matters, Jotaro located Dio's diary and learned about the plan to attain heaven. The diary was then destroyed. making Jotaro the only person in the world with knowledge of the plan. The plan was nearly devastated by this setback, but the involvement of Pucci would end up saving it. Pucci's stand Whitesnake acts as a plan B. In the event that knowledge of the plan is lost, he can seek out and recover the memories of it.
Imagine if he didn't actually read the diary and he just burnt it. Because I wouldn't read it. I'd be like, fuck that shit. Burns the diary.
Pucci would spend the next few decades rising through the ranks of the prison and locating the necessary stands. He gathered a large amount of stand discs, one of which was Limp Bizkit, a stand capable of reviving the bone of Dio. After a long period of waiting, Pucci finally recognized Jotaro's weakness through his daughter Jolene. Using Jangali A, one of Dio's remaining disciples, he would frame Jolene for murder and have her sent to the prison. This caused Jotaro to attempt a rescue, at which point he was able to catch him off guard and steal his stand and memory discs. Now that he had the memory disc, he had full knowledge of the plan. Jolene was no longer a concern of Pucci, so he would make no personal attempt to stop her escape with Jotaro's comatose body. However, Jolene chose to stay in the prison to get the discs back from Pucci. With Limp Bizkit, Dio's bone was given life, and sought out the souls of the prisoners in the punishment ward, creating the Green Baby. Pucci was able to locate the baby and say the 14 phrases he had learned from the disc, fusing the baby with him and giving him the proper stand. Pucci left the prison and headed towards Cape Canaveral, although he would still have to wait for the new moon, giving Jolene time to catch up. Since the Green Baby was technically a combination of Dio and Jonathan's body, it had a Joestar birthmark. After fusing with it, this gave Pucci the birthmark, and also altered his twin brother's body to give him one as well. These birthmarks have supernatural properties, enabling those with them to sense each other's presence. 3 of Dio's sons were drawn to Pucci this way, and were used as pawns to delay Pucci's enemies. Jolene and Weather were also able to sense Pucci in order to catch up with him. Pucci eventually reached Cape Canaveral, however he still had a few days left until the new moon. But Pucci found a way around this, by reaching an understanding of Sea Moon's abilities. Since Sea Moon makes Pucci the center of gravity, by placing himself inside of a frame, he was able to levitate upwards. This allowed him to reach the proper position for the gravity manipulation even without the new moon. By doing this, Pucci awakened Made in Heaven and began accelerating time. Like Dio, Pucci understood fate, and knew that the Joestars and those who support them needed to be dealt with. He wished not only to remove any possible opposition from them, but to also deny them access to heaven. However, Jolene was able to save Emporio in time, allowing him to enter the next universe. Since Jolene and the others were dead, their souls were put in a sort of limbo. Pucci shaped the new universe, stopping them from crossing over.
So if you're dead, your soul doesn't cross over.
This caused them to be replaced by counterparts of themselves. With the original plan, Pucci would allow the universe cycles to complete. However, he still needed to kill Emporio. To do this, he let time resume normally right around the meeting of Jotaro and Jolene at the prison, when he knew Emporio would be nearby. Once he had killed Emporio, Pucci would allow the cycle to complete again, and deactivate Made in Heaven. This would then allow him, and all others throughout history, to live out their full lives within Heaven. Emporio, along with everyone else in that universe, was now aware of their fate, and the fact that it couldn't be influenced. The way that fate operates here is worth pointing out. People seem to have an internal sense of free will. They can think to themselves, and even say out loud whatever they want. However, they cannot control their movements, and are aware of future movements they are fated to take. While this is quite extreme, the system of fate ultimately hasn't changed, only people's understanding of it. Normally, people's movements are still fated, but they are unaware of it. A person can witness an action happening, and then react to it in a way that they fully believe they are choosing. However, both the action and their reaction are fated. This fated reaction is fully believable to the person as if they had chosen it. However, it is still ultimately fated. Some characters are aware of fate, and by altering it slightly can greatly complicate this sequence. However, in this case, only Pucci was able to directly alter fate in this universe, and he did not have knowledge of his own future while Maiden Heaven was active. Emporio was able to use this to his advantage, by manipulating Pucci into pushing Weather's stand disc into him. Now in any other circumstance, Emporio would not be able to do this. However, Pucci's position was unique. He had the ability to shape fate, and was still completely unaware of what the current fate would be. Emporio could see that he would have the disc in position. All he had to do was make Pucci believe that moment was when he should attack. By taking the action of pushing in the disc, Pucci changed fate. This caused fate to favor Emporio, leading to Pucci's defeat. According to Emporio, fate will always ultimately favor the path of justice. With Pucci's death, he was no longer able to control the shape of the new universe. This resulted in a new universe being created, free from Pucci's influence. It is also likely that Pucci himself does not even exist in this new universe. Much like the previous universe, the events of the past would remain mostly the same. However, the present and recent past are altered. The souls of Jolene and the others are restored, but they are given new and better lives. Emporio is now the only person left with memories of the previous universe, but he understands that the Irene of this universe is the same as the Jolene from the previous. Throughout the series, the naming convention of JoJo has highlighted the members of the Joestar bloodline. This is the same bloodline that has been fated to battle evil for over a century. Now that the final threat in this universe, Pucci, has been eliminated, there is no longer a need for this conflict. So the Jolene reborn into this universe lacks that naming convention. Instead of her and her descendants being destined to battle with Dio and his consequences, Irene's future is free to be whatever she sees fit. With this, the original universe of JoJo comes to a fitting end, with fate favoring the right path. Hopefully with this video you reach a better understanding of heaven, and by extension, fate in JoJo.
I thought this was America. Why didn't Pucci bring a gun and just shoot the kid?
For an in-depth look at the concept of fate, and the ways it applies to other parts, please check out my video on fate in JoJo. This video has been another in a series of in-depth looks at topics in JoJo.
Okay, but here's the real question. Is this what Araki planned all along? Or is this just a coincidence? Nah, it's drugs. He took a bunch of drugs and he wrote down notes while he was on a drug trip. It is the only explanation for JoJo. He gets high as fuck and he watches retro movies and stuff like that and he just writes JoJo. That's all it is. Now, considering how illegal narcotics are in Japan, he must be getting them from somewhere. But you did say about mushrooms. A lot more than just mushrooms, my friend. A lot more than just mushrooms. Mushrooms will only get you so far. He was definitely doing more than just mushrooms. It's all causality. So Dio did all of this for peace of mind, because he was overthinking it. Dio couldn't just enjoy JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, could he? In the end, he was just a prisoner. It's very unusual for an anime to give you an ending. Like, a proper ending. Like, the ending is written, and it's tied off with a bow. And there are no loose ends, because the entire universe is gone. It's very unusual for that to happen. Part 6 just, that's the end. And they ride off into the sunset. Done. Kuma, it was your fate to see JoJo because JoJo said so. Dio wanted the power to control fate. But regardless, once his stand is destroyed, his consciousness is destroyed. So he would never obtain that power. built into his original plan, he would die. So he would never be the one to have that power. He would be reborn into the baby that would be fused with another person, and they would have his will, but they wouldn't have his consciousness. So Dio would still die. That's the thing. Not if Pucci gives him the power. But what would he do? Wait to a next timeline, and then how can Pucci give him his own stand? That's the real thing. Would he still be able to use White Snake and remove it? He seems... Did we see him using White Snake or Pale Snake after he got Time Requiem? It's possible. But instead of giving it to Dio in that first loop, he wanted to get rid of the kid. So he tried to get rid of him and failed. So close. So close. He was 1 kill away. If only he brought a gun. Why did he have to try to punch him? Even Dio threw knives in part 3. But so unusual. It's like I could stop JoJo now and be satisfied because there's a conclusion to the story. You know? That's the crazy thing. That's insane. Anime don't usually do that. They leave you with something because it's an unanswered question or a mystery, or who's behind the door, who is the shadow silhouette, like this. What did they say in that one line that's not audible? Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. Yeah. But people say part 7 is the best part. And then people also say part 6 is the best part. But I enjoyed, like, the Pillar Men a lot more. Or maybe I'm just remembering it differently. I don't know. It's highly likely people will want to read the manga when it's finished. Oh, they probably will, because they really got into JoJo. But I would prefer not reading mangas, because I don't read manga. Like, I don't read much. I would prefer an audiobook, if anything. But you can't really do that for a manga, because it's illustrated. How the hell do we end a Friday with something logical and analytical? That's not how you do a Friday stream. Oh my god, I feel so out of it. Now I'm gonna go to bed thinking about JoJo. Oh my god. Really good videos though. Really brings up some really good points. I mean, at first watching I was just like, meh, it's JoJo. Meh, he's floating up in the sky. Meh, he's just fucking with time. It's a JoJo antagonist thing, you know? But there's a little bit of depth to it. There's a little bit of thought in it. It's not fully necessary to just like go with the flow, but it does wrap it up. It does actually show that there is a method to the madness. This was a trip. This was a trip. This was a bizarre adventure. Yeah, I'm going to end up thinking about this tonight while I'm trying to get to sleep. It's highly likely people will want to... Oh, sorry, I already read that. But yeah, like, look, any anime, like anything, is to sell light novels and manga. JoJo became JoJo because fate willed it. It's very possible. It's very possible.
Hey, did I hand you a shrinking potion by accident? I could have sworn that was the gender swapping one.
Don't be hating. She's fun sized, that's all. She doesn't even have to get on her knees to blow.
You want to add anything to that conversation?
Nope, I'm good. In fact, I think your new size makes you an even more formidable and stealthy ninja.